All right, so let me just review a little bit of what we went over last week, not last week, the week before. Last week we did cookies and posters when we introduced the minor prophets. So let's do a little review and see if anybody remembers. Rachel has some too. Yep. So why are the minor prophets called minor? Jim? It's just smaller books. Yeah, the major prophets like Isaiah, Jeremiah, these are books that are 30, 40, sometimes 60 chapters long. Major ones. The minor prophets could all be fit on one scroll. And so they're minor prophets just because they're smaller. It's not because they come later, they overlap with some of the major prophets. It's not because they're less important, they're just shorter. This is actually one of the longest books in the minor prophets, is the book of Hosea that we're starting today, finishing next week. If you recall, last session, I'm probably going to say last week a lot, so from here on in, you know what I mean if I say last week. I went over the fact that the Bible is really like a library of books. So the library has a bunch of different books by a bunch of different authors, and they're organized, especially in the Old Testament, more by what type of book it is than by chronology. So you can roughly follow the chronology, but not entirely. And the minor prophets come at the very end. There are 5 books of the law at the beginning, and then 12 books of history, 5 writings, 5 major prophets, 12 minor prophets. And so we are starting the first of the 12, which is Hosea today. Did I print up enough handouts, and did everybody get one with insight? Okay, awesome. So I'm gonna try to stick to the handout. If you've been here before, you know that's not usually my strong suit. But I'm going to try to do my very best. We saw last time that all of the prophets' Hebrew names are sentences. They mean, every once in a while you'll get one that's just a noun, but usually it's a sentence. And so in this case, Hosea means he saves. So whether that's referring to God as the one who saves, or Hosea bringing God's message as the one who saves, Hosea means he saves. Each time we're going to go over a little bit of the background of just when were they ministering and where were they ministering. So he's ministering the year 740 to 715 BC. Remember, BC goes downwards because you're working your way down to 0. So talk this morning again about the northern kingdom of Israel, southern kingdom of Judah. He was prophesying during the fall of the northern kingdom. That's dated to 721, 722 BC, right in there. And so he was prophesying at the very end of the fall of Israel, and then he was prophesying into the time after Israel had fallen. There are a bunch of other prophets prophesying at this same time. Isaiah was prophesying, Amos, Jonah, and Micah were all active during the same period of time that Hosea was prophesying. So that just gives us a little sense for where we are in the biblical scope and for what his message is going to be. All right, so let's get right into it. We read a little bit about each of the prophets last time. Hosea is, especially the first 3 chapters, is unique among all of the other minor prophets because God uses Hosea's life as a bit of a divine object lesson. And so we're going to see how he did that and what it's supposed to demonstrate. Each of these, the way that the book that I'm adapting tries to go about it is that each session is teaching different truths. So it's called 12 Voices for Truth, and then it tries to take each session and look at a different truth that prophet is bringing out. Sometimes it lands a little better than others in my estimation, but this is the truth about spiritual adultery. And so you can see each one is that adultery destroys the relationship, adultery provokes judgment, adultery requires restoration. So those are kind of thematically the way we can look at each of these sections. We're going to start with Hosea 1:1 to 2:1. I am going to try to keep this as short as I can, knowing that when Sunday school lets out at noon, a number of you will need to go. Hosea is starting on page, if you have the maroon one, 751. Is anybody working off the black Bibles? What page does Hosea? Don't know yet. All right. 703. All right. Very good. So I think our best bet here, because it's only 3 chapters, next week we can't do this. Next week we've got 11 chapters. So we can't read all of what's happening next week. Does mean if you're able to read ahead for next week, Hosea 4 through the end of the book, which is 14, our time together will be more profitable. There are a couple of sections where I'm just going to say, all right, what struck you from these 3 chapters? And we'll open it up, and if nothing particularly struck you, we'll move on. But let's just kind of take turns. It doesn't have to be one verse at a time. It doesn't have to be the whole thing either, but would somebody be willing to start? The trick with names, I tell this to all the readers, just don't hesitate. Say whatever comes out of your mouth as if it's what you meant to say, and everybody will think, oh, that's how it's pronounced. So would anybody, because there are a handful of names that are going to happen here, but anybody willing to start us off, Hosea 1, verse 1, and read for a little while? Christy, nice and loud, go ahead.
The word of the Lord that came to Hosea, the son of Beeri, in the days of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah, and in the days of Jeroboam, the son of Joash, king of Israel. When the Lord first spoke through Hosea, the Lord said to Hosea, go and take yourself a wife of whoredom, and have children of whoredom. For the land commits great whoredom by forsaking the Lord. So he went and took Gomer, the daughter of Bithlehem, and she conceived and bore a son. And the Lord said to him, call his name Jezreel, for in just a little while I will punish the house of Jehu for the blood of Jezreel, and I will put an end to the kingdom of the house of Israel. And on that day I will break the bow of Israel in the valley of Jezreel. She conceived again and bore a daughter, and the Lord said to him, call her name No Mercy, for I will no more have mercy on the house of Israel to forgive them at all, but I will have mercy on the house of Judah, and I will save them by the Lord their God. I will not save them by bow or sword, or by war, or by horses, or by horsemen. When she had weaned no mercy, she conceived and bore a son. And the Lord said, call his name not my people, for you are not my people, and I am not your God. Yet the number of the children of Israel shall be like the sand of the sea, which cannot be measured or numbered. And in the place where it was said to them, you are not my people, it shall be said to them, children of the living God. And the children of Judah and the children of Israel shall be gathered together, and they shall appoint for themselves one head. And they shall go up from the land, for great shall be the day of Jezreel.
And just the next verse.
Say to your brothers, you are my people, and to your sisters, you have received mercy.
Okay, all right, thank you for reading. So we see here, let me work my way through. So what was the first prophetic activity that God required of Hosea? And before you answer and we get into the why, so there are a number of places in the Old Testament. We think mostly of prophets as simply speaking. But there are a number of times where God commands the prophet. He does it with Isaiah a few times. He does it with, if I recall, he does it with Ezekiel. He certainly is doing it here with Hosea, where they're supposed to enact something. They're supposed to do something which is going to demonstrate what God's message is supposed to be. Isaiah got the funniest ones. There's some really, he's supposed to build a little model of Jerusalem and then lay down facing it and then lay down facing away from it and all this interesting stuff to demonstrate. So this is a prophetic activity, even if it's not always speaking. What's the first prophetic activity that God required of Hosea? Okay. Marry a prostitute. Okay, not usual, as in the only place this is commanded in all of Scripture. Why? Why does God want Hosea to marry a prostitute? Does he give a reason here? Yeah, Rachel.
I would think he just wants as an example to the people of what they've done to God.
It's an example to the people of what they've done to God. So if you look at it here, go take to yourself a wife of whoredom, which is an odd word, but and have children of whoredom, for the land commits great whoredom by forsaking the Lord. So Hosea's marriage is supposed to now be an image of what the relationship is between God and his people, or what the relationship between God and his people has become. That the same way that the wife is already not honoring marriage vows, even though she hasn't taken them yet, and kind of spoiler alert, she's going to continue in that activity, as we're going to see, or if you read ahead, you already know. This is to sort of give a human exemplar of what Israel's been doing with God, and Judah as well, because right now Israel has not been taken into exile yet. And so the first prophetic activity is Hosea marrying a prostitute, an unfaithful wife, because her unfaithfulness is to be an image of Israel's unfaithfulness to God. Now, can you think of other biblical examples where God uses a marriage as a way to illustrate a spiritual or heavenly relationship?
Christ in the church.
The example of Christ and the church gets picked up very specifically by Paul a couple of different places. Ephesians 5 is at the greatest length, where it's actually there. It's Paul, on behalf of God, giving instructions to husbands and wives and saying the way that you relate to one another is to be an image of the way Christ relates to his church. So that's on the good side. That's our human marriages should be images of God's marriage to his church. This is the flip side. This is Hosea being asked to enact the unfaithfulness that God's people were evidencing against God. I didn't even put it here, but how'd you feel about this arrangement if you're Hosea? Anybody thinking, this is great, I'm so glad I'm a prophet?
Like a bad deal.
Yeah. So be used to the fact that the prophets aren't always going to be super thrilled that they've been asked to be prophets. I was talking about with Jeremiah today. I mean, he ends up getting assaulted and thrown into a pit, and multiple people try to kill him because his message is not the message that they want to hear. This is for a little bit different reason, but Hosea is being asked to play the role of God. And being asked to play the role of God means getting mistreated. Means having one whom you have valued greatly not treat you with such value. Okay, let's keep going on. How about these names here? Now, the others here got translated, and I said, I mean, it would be interesting if you named your child No Mercy, which sounds pretty hardcore, or Not My People. But again, sentence names were expected back then and could happen for all kinds of different reasons. Jezreel is the one that's a little bit of an outlier. This would be a really, really deep dive on biblical trivia, so I'm not even going to do it. But a number of different events happen in the valley of Jezreel, particularly unfaithfulness on the part of Ahab, on the part of his wife Jezebel. There's some stuff that happens in Jezreel even earlier than that. So Jezreel comes to sort of signify something negative. So this still happens. Like, we could talk about something like, if you said, this is going to be like the Little Bighorn, you know that's going to be a massacre. You're going to get wiped out the same way that that Custer got wiped out at the Little Bighorn. A place name that becomes synonymous with something. This would be sort of similar to that. Jezreel was a place of great unfaithfulness. And so first a place name, that's the hardest one to spot. Now, I like that they translated them for you, although you lose a little bit in the process. So Lo Ami and Lo Ruhamah are the two names that he's supposed to name his daughter, and then the third one's a son, right? Yeah. Why those names? What does that mean? God explains it for us there. Why let's start with Lo Ruhamah, which was translated as No Mercy. Why is he supposed to name his daughter No Mercy?
Show the people he's had enough.
Yeah, I'm not going to be having mercy on you. The children of whoredom. Now, children of whoredom is a little bit, obviously, an odd phrase and an odd concept, but the offspring of the people who have been consistently turning themselves away from their covenant relationship with God are now, he's not going to have mercy on them any longer. The days are coming when mercy comes to an end. Same way that this morning in the sermon, Jeremiah was having to pronounce that to the southern kingdom. Now, this is having to be pronounced by Hosea to the northern kingdom. So it's about roughly 150 years before what we read this morning, but in a way, very, very parallel situation. So mercy is coming to an end. Lo Ami, which translates as not my people. Why? And this would be really, really jarring, by the way. What have they been promised all the way back since Abraham? I mean, you can go back to Genesis 12. That's a ways back in your Bible. As God continues to promise, you'll be my people, and I'll be your God. And now he's finally saying, you ain't my people. Not anymore, not after all that's happened. You are not my people. It would be really, really jarring, because you've got century after century of God continuing to bear with his people. And now he's finally saying, not my people. Not anymore. And he's enacting that through Hosea's own family. This is not a parable. This is a real life parable. This is actually happening. So the question, isn't this all just a little bit harsh? Isn't God being a little bit heavy-handed here? Let's keep a finger. Were you going to say something? Is that raising a hand or just, what's that?
Is that a question?
Yeah, go ahead. Is this a bit harsh?
It's a bit harsh, but I think the thing that strikes me the most is that that's like Hosea marrying a prostitute. He knew what was going to happen. God knew what was going to happen, and yet he still married his people. So there's that initial commitment, even though he knows he's going to get betrayed. He still did it. He thought it was still worth it.
He knew what he was signing up for, and he thought it was still worth it. You're going to have to hold this thought until the end of next week's class to see some of the resolution that's going to happen, although you are allowed to read ahead. Elijah.
I mean, it seems fair to Israel, but at this point, they probably deserved it centuries earlier.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't really seem fair to Hosea. It definitely doesn't seem fair to his kids.
Right. Yeah, so it seems fair to Israel after generation after generation after generation of unfaithfulness. Doesn't seem fair to Hosea. Doesn't seem fair to his kids. And that's why it's, I don't know why whoever split up the chapters the way that they did. Keep in mind, I've mentioned this before, the chapters, the verse numbers, those were added by later editors and reflect decisions that were made that we're free to agree or disagree with. They're not there in the original text. I personally would have had chapter 1 end after what's currently chapter 2, verse 1, because it brings quite a closure. Say to your brothers, you are my people, and to your sisters, you have received mercy. Because it says, the children of Judah, the children of Israel shall be gathered together. They shall appoint for themselves one head. They shall go up from the land. And then great shall be the day of Jezreel, which is also this huge reversal. Jezreel had meant judgment. Now it's going to mean God's faithfulness and restoring. Very much ties with this morning's passage. And so lo ami is going to become ami, and lo ruhama, you're figuring out lo means to negate something. It's not mercy is going to become mercy, and not my people is going to become my people. So this will be brought full circle, but let's see if God is justified. So keeping a finger on Hosea chapters 1 and 2, page 323 in the burgundy and maroon Bibles. I'm not sure what page you'd find it on in the black Bibles, maybe a similar page. We're heading to 2 Kings 17, verses 7 through 18. Now this gets a little confusing because if you look at verse 6, it says in the 9th year of Hosea, and it's like, oh, Hosea. No, different guy. This is a king. There's a difference between Hosea and Hosea, although actually they're technically the same name. But the northern kingdom is being taken away. So this is a lot of what I referenced this morning. In the 9th year of Hosea, the king of Assyria captured Samaria. This is verse 6. Carried the Israelites away to Assyria, placed them in Halah, and on the Habor, and the river of Gozan, and the cities of the Medes. Place names don't matter a whole lot. But here's the explanation, and I think this is worth knowing. And this occurred because the people of Israel had sinned against the Lord their God, who had brought them up out of the land of Egypt, from under the hand of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and had feared other gods, and walked in the customs of the nations, whom the Lord drove out before the people of Israel, in the customs that the kings of Israel had practiced. And the people of Israel did secretly against the Lord their God things that were not right. They built for themselves high places in all their towns, from watchtower to fortified city. They set up for themselves pillars and asherim, which is a type of idol, on every high hill and under every green tree. And there they made offerings on all the high places, as the nations did whom the Lord carried away before them. By the way, this isn't just a way to remember who the nations are, but God punished the nations for exactly what the Israelites are now repeating. So the nations that were carried away before them. They did wicked things, provoking the Lord to anger. They served idols of which the Lord had said to them, you shall not do this. Yet the Lord warned Israel and Judah by every prophet and every seer, saying, turn from your evil ways and keep my commandments and my statutes, in accordance with all the law that I commanded your fathers, and that I sent you by my servants the prophets. But they would not listen, but were stubborn, as their fathers had been, who did not believe in the Lord their God. They despised his statutes and his covenant that he had made with their fathers, and the warnings that he gave them. They went after false idols and became false, which is very poetic. They followed the nations that were around them, concerning whom the Lord had commanded them that they should not do like them. And they abandoned all the commandments of the Lord their God, and made for themselves metal images of 2 calves. And they made an Asherah, and worshipped all the host of heaven, and served Baal. And they burned their sons and their daughters as offerings, and used divinations and omens, and sold themselves to do evil in the sight of the Lord, provoking him to anger. Therefore the Lord was very angry with Israel and removed them out of his sight. None was left but the tribe of Judah only, which is the southern kingdom. So, is this all a bit harsh on God's part? I think very much to Elijah's point. You can't argue that God is being harsh to Israel. Generation after generation of them rejecting God in every possible way, embracing the gods that he had clearly destroyed and conquered and rendered null and void, whom they embrace instead of him. All of the open rebellion against all of the prophets. Not being harsh to them. Elijah.
This is the same, this is a different account of the same event, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. Just wanted to make sure. It's so much earlier in the Bible, I sort of assumed it was a different event.
So this is turning back to the section of history, recounting the same events that happened during the life of Hosea, which is so much later in terms of number of pages, but it's the exact same time frame. Correct. Good question. All right, so it's worth pausing to consider, and this can be an open conversation, although we're pressed for time. Well, what are our idols? What are the things that God has clearly told us that we should not be following? That he has clearly shown his ascendancy over. He has greater power than these. And yet, to which we continue to turn for our own comfort and meaning and purpose. We probably could fill the board with the list. We could get very personal and autobiographical if we wished. I'm going to use this more as a, maybe reflect on this one a little bit. Because it's awfully easy to look at Israel and say what fools they were, while committing the same errors, simply in different ways. Very few of you are probably going to go home and make a calf out of metal and then bow down to it. Probably not going to happen. However, I think we all have fallen victim at various times to precious metals and their appeal, and to the things that we do in order to try to get more of them, or to appease them, or that sort of thing. So even wealth is certainly something we can easily start to relate to. There are many, I think, different examples of that sort of thing. Does anybody want to comment before we move on? Like I said, it's more to kind of spark reflection. But yeah, Christy, and then Juliana, was that a hand or yeah? No. Okay. All right, Christy.
Just really quickly, when it's helpful for me to remember that there's a quote about what an idol is, and whatever your heart puts your trust in, that is true of your God.
Yes.
When I think about this, because it can seem so separate from us, but who do I actually trust and what have I put my hope in? That's
Yes.
where it fits.
Luther's explanation into the first article in the large catechism, which I know I brought up in a sermon a couple of weeks ago, so I'm sure you remember it word for word, which is, whatever you put your heart in and place your trust in, that is truly your God. So yes, we don't tend to have household gods sitting on our shelves, although perhaps some trophies might represent that. But whatever you put your heart on, whatever you put your faith in or trust in, that's your God. And John Calvin, whom I very rarely quote fondly, but in this case is absolutely spot on, the human heart is an idol factory. We are constantly generating other things to serve and other ways to find meaning and purpose and fulfillment other than God himself. So yeah, it's not necessarily going to be an Asherah pole. You've probably never put one of those up before, or perhaps ever even seen one, like the Israelites were doing on every high hill. But we are no less prone to idolatry than they were. Our idols just look different. Elijah.
Sorry, this is sort of a different direction, but I'm
Yep.
just very curious, and I've always wondered. I can understand why the idols that we're tempted towards are tempting. What were they doing? That's like the least tempting form of sin.
Right.
Like, what was the appeal?
So that's an excellent question. What was the appeal of idolatry, particularly that generation after generation would turn away to these other gods? Does anybody know or have an inkling of why was idolatry so appealing, Rachel?
Maybe because God was invisible to them, just
Okay.
talking, but here was a visible presence that
Yep.
they could touch and still pray to and still look for answers, even though they didn't get them.
Yeah, so the tangibility could have had appeal, that I've got my God right here. Where's your God? Here's mine. You know, you say he's out there somewhere. How do I know? Here's mine. You can hold him. You can touch him. You know, that sort of thing. So just the tangibility, certainly. And I think there we can relate to how many times have we said, I wish God would just actually speak to me, or I wish I could just actually see him. So that certainly could be part of it. So, Bev, yep.
Well, I never thought about it before, but after hearing you talk about it, if your God is a rock,
If your God's a rock, or say something a little akin to Elf on the Shelf, right? Very timely, right? Elf on the Shelf can't be all places at all times, right? So if he's in that room and I'm in this room, I'm good, right? So I can exercise some measure of control, in a sense, over an idol. Jim, I think you had a hand too, right? Yeah.
I think something like immediate gratification,
Mm-hmm.
like there's something there, they can worship it at their, whenever they want.
Yep.
And maybe feel, is this listening to them?
Yeah, and I think that in some ways kind of combines both of those points, which is I can worship in the way that fits well with me, whereas the Hebrews' God was very clear. You have to go to this place, you have to worship in this way, you have to be from this tribe, you have to wear these clothes, you have to bring these animals on these days. I mean, he had a lot of demands. He was a high-maintenance God compared to the rocks you could put on the shelf and say, you know what, I'm going to worship this one every other Tuesday when I feel like it. Right? Or, and this I think all starts to go toward the answer that I think kind of is the fullest, which is, I think, the appeal of idolatry, and I'm not the only one in this, I've read some things about this as well, is the transactional nature of the relationship with an idol. And not to sort of take pot shots, but I visited a Hindu temple down in New York City, and they knew that we were Christians and we were visiting, and this wasn't some weird tourism thing or something, but and while we were there, they had all of this particular temple. Hindus have a lot of different embodiments of the gods. Over 6 million is the guess by some who study this. And this was particularly dedicated to the one who's represented as an elephant, Ganesha. And all around the temple that we visited were all of these different sort of iterations of Ganesha. And while we were there, a family came in and they brought like milk and fruit and stuff, and they're pouring milk out at the idol. There was a priest, monk or priest, I'm not sure the right term, that was helping to do this. And I said, if it's not intrusive, what's happening here? And he went up, our guide went over and asked. He said, okay, well, their son is interviewing right now for a job promotion. And they're hoping that the Ganesha will favor this attempt, and that's part of why they're here, because among other things, Ganesha represents plenty, and so they're coming to a temple of Ganesha and making these offerings to Ganesha. And it's a very, in that sense, transactional. I know what I want from him, I know what I'm giving to him, I do my part, he does his part. And I think we can also understand, we frequently try to do this with God. I mean, think of Luther's prayer, help me and I'll become a monk, right? You keep me alive, I'll give you this, you give me that. It's a very transactional relationship that the Christian faith particularly, and even the Old Testament faith, was not equal and transactional. God was giving something we couldn't earn or deserve or pat ourselves on the back for. And I think that does go against, we understand transactional. We do this all the time as humans. If it's with peers, it's like, all right, so if you'll go with me to this thing you don't want to go to, then I'll go with you to the thing I don't want to go to, right? We negotiate like this. We negotiate with our kids, right? If you can just keep quiet for 20 minutes more, I'll let you watch that movie. Right? It's just wired into how we are as humans, to transact. And I give something and you give something. And that's not the way God functions, and it does tend to be the way idolatry functions. So I think that's part of the appeal. The one other part of it culturally, and I'm glad you asked, because idolatry is going to be all over the place, not just here, but throughout the book, so it's good to spend a little time on, is it was understood that each city or perhaps nation would have their own god. And when the city or nation marched out against the other city or nation, their god marches out in front of them, and then whoever won, it kind of goes to that god's account. That this God has proven that he's more powerful than that God. And so I'm going to worship the one who has the power. And the gods usually were named in such a way as to indicate what they had power over. So that's where you can get, to the God of the harvest or to the God of whatever. That's why we get the fun part. I think God was definitely being a little sly. Do you remember what name, when Moses says, what name should I tell the people? And God gives his own name, which gives what makes him unique compared to other gods. What does he say his name is? I am. Yeah, that's what makes me unique. Compared to all the other gods, I actually exist. That's what I've got going for me. Which is, I think it was God being rather sly on that. And that becomes Yahweh, God's name. His name is that he's the one who really exists. But in that culture, it was understood right down to households. that you had household gods. That shows up a few times in Genesis, the stories about household gods and stealing the household gods. The idea was, my God's better than your God. And that's why, for instance, the plagues become so interesting, because you can connect each of the 10 plagues with one of the Egyptian pantheon of gods. Either they were represented as, say, one of them was, I forget which one, was represented in bodily form as a frog. And then God sends billions and billions of frogs to Egypt. Like, you want frogs? I got frogs. But it's showing his power over all of these different false gods or false idols. And so I think part of it's also that cultural thing, just the understanding we live in a much more secular culture from that regard. No one lived in a secular culture back then. Everyone had gods that were associated with their group, whether their group was a family or a city or a nation. And so that's why the danger was, if you let these families and groups and nations stay in the promised land, eventually you're going to be tempted to worship their God. Because, listen, hard times are going to come. There's going to be some time that your valley doesn't produce as much as 2 valleys over, and you're going to be tempted to worship their God so you can get what they're getting. And you're going to turn away from the one true God. And honestly, and I'll kind of end the digression here, part of the problem just comes when you allow God to be put into that comparative framework, where you start to look at it and say, I wonder if this other God would be better. Very much like Eve, considering the fruit on the tree, and then thinking, hey, that doesn't look so bad to eat. You leave these other gods around, eventually you're going to follow them. That's what God was warning. They left them around. So the failure really starts all the way back in the book of Joshua in that regard, when they don't drive all the people out of the land. All right, that was a lot of stuff going on there, but I do like a deeper dive into idolatry and what would the appeal have been. All right, let's keep going on here. What are our idols? What corrective would be appropriate in regards to our idols? Let's leave that for reflection. Maybe circle it or something. Maybe try to spend some time thinking about that on your own, because none of us is guilt-free in this regard. All of us have idols towards which we are tempted. Nevertheless, though, in chapter 2, verse 1, what was promised? Well, the people who were literally named not my people will once again be my people. And the people who were literally named no mercy, God will once again show mercy. God keeps his promises even when we don't, and even when he has to punish. All right, let's keep moving here. Chapter 2, verse 2 through 13. Somebody want to read that for us? Gives us a little flavor for, yeah, go ahead, Rachel. Gives us a little flavor here. All right.
Plead with your mother, plead, for she is not my wife, and I am not her husband. But she put away her whoring from her face, and her adultery from between her breasts, lest I strip her naked, and make her as in the day she was born, and make her like a wilderness, and make her like a parched land, and kill her with thirst. On her children also I will have no mercy, because they are children of whoredom. For their mother has played the whore, she who conceived them has acted shamefully. For, she said, I will go after my lovers who give me my bread and my water, my wool and my flax, my oil and my drink.
Let's pause right there. So just real quickly, because we can think of these verses and it's left ambiguous. At this point, he's talked about Hosea's actual wife, Gomer, and God has talked about his wife, Israel. Who's being talked about here in verses 2 through 5? Israel? Gomer? We're not even clear, right? It's been clear that one represents the other. And so what I say about one applies equally to the other. So, well, most recently it's been talking about Israel, but just before that he was giving his own actual children names. So then when he says to the children, plead with your mother, is that the children of Israel or is that the children of Gomer? And the answer is yes. That's the way the whole image works. What applies to one applies to the other. So it's just interesting to think through this in terms of just physical, literal, earthly reality, and then think through it again in regards to the spiritual reality of Israel's idolatry, and both are the same thing. And so she's made herself to be not my wife by not honoring the vows that she was supposed to keep, and thus I'm not her husband. But plead with her so that she would stop this, lest I end up stripping her naked and making her as the day that she was born. But then make her like a wilderness. All right, is that that sounds a little more like land than like a person, but the simile still applies. Upon her children I would have no mercy. And then notice, for she said, I will go after my lovers who give me my bread and my water, my wool and my flax, my oil and my drink. that starts to lean heavily back towards the figurative, the spiritual reality. And Elijah, to your question, why was Israel turning away toward these other gods? Because they thought the other gods were providing what they would need, and that their God was not, which is the same problem we have with our own idols, our own gods that we chase. All right, someone want to read, why don't we do, we'll do 2, 6 through 7. You can keep reading if you want, Rachel. I had to cut you short. Were you like eager to?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, 2 is,
Not the worst part either.
yeah, all right, yeah, you did the hard part. You can do 6 and 7 then.
6 and 7? Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Therefore, I will hedge up her way with thorns, and I will build a wall against her, so she cannot find her path. She shall pursue her lovers, but not overtake them, and she shall seek them, but shall not find them. Then she shall say, I will go and return to my first husband, for it was better for me than now.
All right, we're pausing there again. This is interesting to me. How is God going to correct this sin on the part of Gomer / Israel? Yeah, he's going to keep them. He's going to let them keep pursuing these false goals. He's just going to make sure that pursuit ends up fruitless. It's a really very just punishment. He's not going to stop their pursuit. He's just going to make it very clear how fruitless that pursuit is by ensuring that pursuit will yield none of what she wants it to yield, be that Israel or Gomer. There's actually something very, very right about that and very clever about that. Okay, I'll let you keep doing it. Again, we do this sometimes as parents or perhaps as supervisors or bosses or that sort of thing when they're insisting on doing it the wrong way, right? At some point, you stop telling them it's wrong. You say, all right, go ahead, have fun. I'll be right here when you're done, right? Yeah, exactly, right? Because you know how it's going to turn out, but headstrong, they're wanting to pursue their own course. So rather than try to redirect, to say, okay, go ahead, follow that course, see how that turns out, let me know, because I already know what the answer actually is. In a sense, that's what God is doing with Israel, and it's what he's telling Hosea he should be doing with Gomer as well. Remember, everything in 1 through 3 applies in both senses, both the literal with Hosea and Gomer, the humans, and in the spiritual with God and his bride, which is Israel. Elijah? No? No? Just, all right, look like it was raised. Yeah, keep it down. All right? Yeah. So let's keep on going here. What had Israel or Gomer failed to realize according to verse 8? And then how would God bring about that realization according to 9 through 13? So let's read 8 through 13. Do you want to keep going, Rachel? Bring it. All right, bring us home.
And she did not know that it was I who gave her the grain, the wine, and the oil, and who lavished on her silver and gold, which they used for Baal. Therefore I will take back my grain in its time, and my wine in its season, and I will take away my wool and my flax, which were to cover her nakedness. Now I will uncover her lewdness in the sight of her lovers, and no one shall rescue her out of my hand. And I will put an end to all her mirth, her feasts, her new moons, her Sabbaths, and all her appointed feasts. And I will lay waste her vines and her fig trees, of which she said, these are my wages, which my lovers have given me. I will make them a forest, and the beasts of the field shall devour them. And I will punish her for the feast days of the Baals, which she burned offerings to them, when she burned offerings to them, and adorned herself with her ring and jewelry, and went after her lovers, and forgot me, declares the Lord.
Okay, so according to verse 8, what had Israel / Gomer failed to realize? Israel was saying, I'm going to chase after everybody who's providing me all of my needs. But Carol? That God was the one who had provided. So Israel / Gomer thought that they were going after the true provider of the needs, not realizing it's really God who's been providing all those needs. All right, so then how does God bring about the realization that they need to have, that Israel / Gomer needs to have? How's God going to bring that about? Take it away. Stop providing. So if you're pursuing this particular, let's say it's a god, let's say it's Asherah, which was one of the gods to whom the Asherim, the poles were built. All right, so go ahead and pursue Asherah and see how that turns out. I'm going to shut off the spigot now, and you can pray as much as you want to Asherah or to Baal or whoever the other the false gods are, and you'll get nothing. And you're going to learn in very clear terms how much it is me, not them, that's providing. So again, a very true and clever kind of sense of justice here. Let her pursue her own way and realize just how empty that way actually is. Again, this is an application kind of thing, something we can think through. What parallels can we see in our own lives? Times that we've misattributed the true sources of what it is that we're experiencing rather than attributing it to God. Now, we can see this happen with success, we can see this happen with health, we can see this happen with relationships, where it's very easy to say, well, the reason that happened is because I did this, this, and this, and those really were, if I'm honest, those were good decisions, and now we're seeing the fruit of those decisions. And you fail to recognize it's God who sent those successes. It's God who provided that. And yes, maybe you made some good decisions along the way as well. Who gave you the ability to make those decisions? Who even gave you the opportunity to make those decisions? All that's from God also. We easily misattribute. Again, it's not so much toward little, statues, although that does still happen in various parts of the world. That's not our culture's challenge as much, usually. Although, what sacrifices do you suppose have been made to earn a Super Bowl trophy or an Oscar or a Tony or an Emmy? Those are just little gold statues, aren't they? Maybe we're not as far advanced as we think that we are. But can we actually attribute joy, lasting success, lasting meaning or purpose to those things? Not if you study the lives of the people who've achieved them. And so I think and again, this is more for individual reflection, what ways do we misattribute where our true meaning, purpose, sense of contentment, or happiness is going to come from? And what's the correction to that misattribution? All right, and then our last section here, 2:14 through 3:5. This is interesting. You had to read all the crummy stuff, so Rachel, read 14 and 15 at least.
Okay.
All right.
Therefore, behold, I will allure her and bring her into the wilderness and speak tenderly to her. And there I will give her her vineyards and make the valley of Achor a door of hope. And there she shall answer as in the days of her youth, as at the time when she came out of the land of Egypt.
Okay, so there's some wonderful things here, but how is God going to restore Israel? She's been chasing what she thinks is the source of her plenty and finding it to be barren. What's God's plan for restoration? He's going to draw her. He's going to allure her. And allure her to go where? Out of the wilderness, out into the barrenness, and then he's going to cause the barrenness to become what? So she's going to chase plenty and find barrenness. Instead, he's going to allure her out into the barrenness and show her his plenty. It's a wonderful turn, isn't it? It's a wonderful way to bring this about. And by the way, it's happening linguistically because Achor, you'd have to look down in the footnote to know that Achor means trouble. But it says the valley of Achor there in verse 15. I will give her her vineyards. I will make the valley of trouble a door of hope. Isn't that a really, really cool phrase? Just regardless, I will make the valley of trouble a door of hope. Does that make you think of any sort of prominent biblical imagery? Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. And then God prepares before me in the presence of my enemies a feast. The valley of trouble becoming the door of hope. I really, once I read that, I'm like, oh, that is such a cool image. And so very true, isn't it? How often does our truer sense of hope and meaning, even if we ignore the spiritual side, which we shouldn't really do, but how many times has the worst struggle led to the greatest joy? The hardest burden has led to the greatest celebration. Even in a fully human sense, how much more so in our spiritual sense? The valley of trouble becoming the door of hope. I really love that image. Christy, did you have a hand up?
You had just said images.
The cross, absolutely, right? The worst valley of trouble, although that's on a hill, but where wickedness is being celebrated and seeming to win is actually the greatest hope that we possibly have. I mean, it's been pointed out, and I think we've talked about it before. Hanging a cross at the front of our sanctuary would be a bit like hanging a guillotine or a gallows. I mean, that's what it was. It was a place of very brutal execution, which has become to us the symbol of God's love and God's greatest hope. If you had asked anybody in like AD 20, You're going to be a group of people gathered around a big golden cross. They'd have to assume that was some weird idolatry thing, right? But instead, that valley of trouble is the door of hope instead. I love that image. All right, so just a couple more things here. So what's the result going to be from 16 to 23? In that day, declares the Lord, you will call me my husband, and no longer will you call me my Baal. Now, there's some fun wordplay going on here. Baal means Lord, and he's saying, don't call me Lord anymore, call me husband, which literally is call me my man. Ishi is my husband, but husband is man, and wife is woman. And so no longer will you call me my Lord, you'll call me my man, which, by the way, change it to my man, and all of a sudden the images of the Son of Man start to become much more prominent. No longer can I even be in any way compared to Baal, because I'm coming as a man. I do think there are some messianic sort of overtones here, even though they would not in any way have been obvious. Nobody would have heard this verse at the time and say, oh, they're going to send a human. But the change of the term from no longer will you call me my Lord or my master in that regard, you'll call me my husband, my man, which is so powerful because that's not the way she's been treating him. I will remove the names of the Baals from her mouth. They shall be remembered by name no more, which is also kind of came true. How many of you can name any Baals? Nope. Those names have gone. That's good. I'm glad you can't, right? That's a good thing. It shows that we still remember the Lord. We don't remember the Baals. That's what he promised. And I will make for them a covenant on that day with the beasts of the field, the birds of the heavens, and the creeping things of the ground, picking up very much creation language here. I will abolish the bow, the sword, and war from the land. I will make you to lie down in safety. I will betroth you to me forever. I will betroth you to me in righteousness and justice, in steadfast love and in mercy. I will betroth you to me in faithfulness, and you shall know the Lord. Isn't this amazing how gorgeous this is after what we were just reading about Israel and Gomer's behavior, how generous God is? In that day I will answer, declares the Lord. I'll answer the heavens. They shall answer the earth. The earth shall answer the grain, the wine, and the oil. They shall answer Jezreel, which formerly had been a place of trouble, but which literally means, by the way, God will sow. I will sow her for myself in the land. I will have mercy on no mercy. I will say to not my people, you are my people. And he shall say, you are my God. And then the Lord said to me, and now we go back fully to the literal, the physical. We're talking about Hosea and Gomer. The Lord said to me, go again, love a woman who's loved by another man and is an adulteress, even as the Lord loves the children of Israel. Though they turn to other God and love cakes of raisins, that one kind of strikes the ear a little bit funny, that if you had raisin bran this morning, that's not necessarily idolatry. But those were the things that were offered in some of the idolatrous practices. So I bought her for 15 shekels of silver and a homer and a lethek of barley. And I said to her, you must dwell as mine for many days. You shall not play the whore or belong to another man. So will I also be to you. For the children of Israel shall dwell many days without king or prince, without sacrifice or pillar, without ephod or household gods. There they show up again. Afterward, the children of Israel shall return and seek the Lord their God and David their king. They shall come in fear to the Lord and to his goodness in the latter days. So you see, we've also now looked forward not just to the restoration from this particular exile, but to the return, the ultimate return of Christ. We're pointing forward to as well. So how the first three verses are clearly how is Gomer to be restored, and then verses 4 and 5 of chapter 3, how is Israel to be restored? Gomer's to be restored how? What's Hosea supposed to do?
She's gonna go back and be legitimate.
He's going to buy her back.
Yeah.
Yeah, and what's the name when you buy something back? It's still printed on the top of our cans. You can take it back to the store. They'll buy it back for the redemption value. She'll be redeemed. She'll be purchased back. And then so Gomer will be purchased back by Hosea. How will Israel be purchased back? Well, of course, we know in Christ that shall be the redemption price. That's what it means to be redeemed. So, all right, so a lot going on here with chapters 1 through 3. Now, chapters 4 through 14 are going to, you need this as background because the rest of it's going to be a more typical prophecy. We're not going to hear a lot about Hosea the person or Gomer the person. We're going to hear a lot more about Israel and so forth, which is why we can group them together If you want, like I said, I know some of you like to look ahead, but even if that's not normally you, there are some sections here. Like right here, it's going to say chapters 9 and 10. What stands out? That's all I'm going to say. Is there something you want to talk about from 9 and 10? It's not because they're unimportant. We just don't have time next week to go through with the same level of detail we just did. It's going to happen again, chapters 12 and 13. So if you want to take the sheet as you're reading ahead, feel free to do that. It's just about the longest chunk we're ever going to need to take on. Most of the minor prophets, the 3 chapters we did, would have been the whole book. So we're going to be able to go verse by verse through a lot of them, but next week we won't. So that's why it's getting such a big warning. If you get a chance to read 4 through 14 a few times, maybe come forearmed, whether you've got the handout or not. That would be good. All right, let's close with a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you for sending us your word, and though parts of it can be obscure, reminding us we are of a different time and a different culture, nevertheless, the truths that you teach are timeless. We suffer from the same temptations and challenges and shortcomings as the people of Israel and their forefathers before them and all who have followed. And so as we are aware how easily we can trust in things that aren't you and seek after other sources for the blessings that truly only you can provide, pray that you would guard our hearts against that kind of idolatry or misattributing the source of our ultimate meaning. And instead, by your word, by your truth, continue to guide us back to you and all that you give and provide. Thank you for each person here, for your word to guide us, and trust that that word shall go with us throughout the course of our week. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right. If anybody didn't sign up for the Wednesday night soup supper, but you'd like to, that sign up's in the hall. And hopefully see some of you then and the rest of you next week. Yep, thumbs up. Good job, bud.